Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mendez. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings and Book 11 of the Marcus Didius Falco series, One Virgin Too Many. The virgins in question are the Vestal Virgins, which are a Roman religious organization, cult thing, an all-female organization. Basically, you get chosen in what is supposed to be a lottery, purely up to chance, the choice of the gods, whatever. But as is suggested in this book, it would probably have been fixed because, I mean, let's be honest, this is the kind of thing where you don't want to have just anybody picked, because a Vestal Virgin gets chosen as basically a child, and then she is taken to live with the other Vestals, and for the next, basically for the next, 30 years, or 30 years after adulthood, I don't recall. It's not a thing that I paid all that much attention to. The point is that you get trained and then you are a Vestal for all that period, and the thing is, being a Vestal Virgin is, well, obviously it's in the title, you have to stay a virgin. That means no men, no sex, no nothing. But, you also have a lifestyle that is in some ways fairly cloistered. There would, however, have been girls, young women, who would have wanted to be a Vestal because, as is said in this book, among other things, after a Vestal finishes her time in the temple, in effect, after she does her time, when she leaves, unlike most women in the Roman state, a Vestal would not have needed a man to be a legal guardian to act on her behalf for business purposes, for whatever. This is one of those things of long-term historical importance to women, at least, is, the same reason that there were a lot of young women who would have wanted to marry an old man to speed up the process of becoming historically of becoming a widow, because the thing about being a widow is you are a respectable woman, but you don't have to have a man doing things for you, because you are also a married woman, but your husband is dead, so you don't have the restrictions of having to do what your husband tells you, and you have, control over your life in a way that is basically unprecedented for just about anyone else. And being a Vestal means that in exchange for 30 years of being stuck doing the Vestal Virgin thing, when you leave, you are an adult, you are able to live on your own, you are given a very, very large payout by the Emperor so that you can live independently for the rest of your life. And so, to an extent, there are reasons to want to be a Vestal. The trade-off, of course, is that you don't get to have a normal life. You don't get to, do normal things normal people do. You have the restrictions of being in a religious order. And so it's one of those things where when Falco, his niece, apparently, who is about 8, decides that she wants to be a Vestal, and apparently her father, who died in the last book, had signed her up to be in the lottery. Her mother, and both Falco and the girl's mother, Falco's sister Maya, they both disapprove of being a Vestal Virgin because, for the same reason that many people might disapprove of somebody getting caught up in hardcore religious whatever, and that is that, you're restricting yourself in a great many ways, and the thing is that, especially when it's a child may not understand those restrictions until it's too late for them to back out, because, of course, once you become a Vestal, you can't back out of that. It's one of those things that you can't get out of. And so you have a very interesting character in the course of this book. We have 2 Vestals who have sort of roles in this, and the first one is one who kind of acts as the mouthpiece for the Vestal Virgins generally. She's sort of an attractive person to speak to the public on their behalf. But the other one is a former Vestal who had just the previous year, finished doing her time and had left and gotten married to somebody after leaving, which is frankly rare because, I suspect part of it is that the Vestals get used to having a certain holier-than-thou aspect, but also because of their relative immunity and freedom from, men importuning them in various ways. I would bet that at least part of that is that a great deal of Roman society, especially because these are no longer young women, they will all be women who are at least 40, maybe 50, that, this is an older woman who is aggressive, knows exactly what she wants, and will not put up with some man BSing her. And so it's going to be rare for a former Vestal to, get married. This one did. Her husband was murdered, and it's a whole thing. But what's really, really interesting is at the end of the book, we find out during the course of the book that her family and the family of this little girl who sort of starts everything off, because you have this little girl, Gaia, I believe it's Gaia, who approaches Falco at the start of the book basically saying, I think somebody's trying to kill me, but she's 6, and so Falco is less than willing to listen to her because she's 6. But the thing is, her whole family is deeply, deeply inculcated in various religious cults, and I'm using cult not in sort of pejorative way, but just in a way that, her grandfather was the flamen for the Temple of Jupiter, and her great aunt was, her great aunt or aunt, whichever it was, is, a former Vestal, and various other family members have various religious things. And the thing about these religious restrictions is that, for example, the Flaminalis, or whatever it was, he's sort of super restricted. Like, there's this whole thing about how he's not allowed to see anything that could indicate binding, and if he sees, a criminal in chains, the criminal has to be immediately released, and he's not allowed to have vines on his house, because if he has vines on it, then vines can bind things up, which is, metaphorically a thing that is like rope, and so he can't see them, and, there's all kinds of stuff like that. Massive numbers of restrictions, and being intensely hedged in by religious ritual every single second of the day. This is basically a man who has, this constant unending focus in his life on religion, and indeed after his wife died, when he was no longer able to have this role and was booted out of it, he's still living as though this is what he was. There's all of this, and their whole household is just hemmed in with these restrictions, and the children are growing up isolated from everybody else, because they are not merely a wealthy family, they are also, religious whatnot. And Aunt Terencia, I think her name is Terencia, the aunt who's a former Vestal, deeply disapproves of their plan to make this 6-year-old girl into a new Vestal, of getting her put into the lottery, which is made clear during the course of the book to be fixed, that she disapproves of it because she really, really thinks that at least one person in their family should grow up normal, that they need to get out from under all of this religious malarkey, because they're getting weird, and they're living life with these weird, intense, over-the-top restrictions. And even though, she appreciates the decades of being a Vestal have given her freedom that very few women have in Rome, she wants better for her niece, for her great niece, because the girl is 6, and she has no friends, and she has no playmates, and she has, she's spoiled in terms of everybody giving her everything, but she just lives in this house with no other children, with, these unending secrets and twisty religious whatnot, and she has no chance of being a normal child. And it's very, very interesting to get to the end of the book after you've seen Falco, who disapproves of much of this organized religion, which winds up being somewhat ironic because Vespasian promotes him to procurator of the royal geese, which is sort of like a promotion that gets him up into the middle class, and he gets paid a lot of money, and there's a whole bunch of stuff, but it's one of those promotions that's like a punishment at the same time as it's a promotion, because now he has to basically look after geese for the rest of forever, and geese are terrible. Not as bad as chickens. I hate chickens. But geese are terrible. They're aggressive and they're angry and they poop everywhere, and the geese are awful. Anyways, so Falco, has sort of been sideways entered into this religious life because the geese have religious significance, but as do the chickens. He's actually looking after poultry generally. Anyways, but the thing is that, so he disapproves of it, though. He disapproves of it in his very, very Republican viewpoint of these precious cults that gather power together and use their abstruse arcane rituals to lord themselves over other people. And we see this family, in a way, doing that, but you also have this aunt who, after having gone through 30 years of it, I think, especially the space of also being a Vestal meant, I suspect that she learned better and realized that this is not something that you want to give your children into. It's one thing if somebody makes a conscious choice as an adult to live a restricted life in that way. I'm not going to, criticize somebody who feels called to a particular, restricted religious lifestyle, but, it's one thing to choose as an adult to join the church as a nun. It's quite another to take a 6-year-old child and say, by the way, you are mandatorily going to be a nun. You're 6, you don't get to choose. Because a 6-year-old doesn't know any better and won't even understand the options that might be open to her, because she's 6. And so it's, to me at least, it was one of the most affecting points in this book when the aunt looks at Falco and says that at least one member of our family should grow up to be normal. And there's a whole thing. There's a dramatic thing at the end where Falco has to go down a well head first, which is, which everybody makes fun of him after the whole thing, because the 6-year-old girl fell down a well, but the only way to get somebody to fit into that well is, to get a hold of her is for somebody to go down first, because it's too narrow to turn around once you're down there. So, his toga and everything falls over his head, and he doesn't wear a loincloth, so everything is visible as he gets pulled out of the well. So, of course, Petro and all of his various cop friends make fun of him for it, because, that's what you do after the girl is rescued. Anyway, and there's a murder that happens, which, it seems to me very likely that Falco may wind up being forced into picking the brother-in-law that he doesn't like, or possibly continuing to have have Anacrates, this head spy, as his off-the-books partner in his business, but that's sort of an implication at the end of the book. Anyway, I think that's everything. Wow, I've avoided talking about most of the actual plot in this, and yeah, it's a good time, and that's everything, so I will see you all next week.